The Midland Daily News visited Dow to discuss its 125-year history and its plans for the future.
We're here today to mark a momentous anniversary for Dow. It's 125th year in business. So congratulations, Jim, to you and all of the Dow employees.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks for taking some time to cover this for Dow. I think it's really important to the community, and glad that you're interested.
Thank you. So it seems like a perfect opportunity to reflect on not just your past, but also the company's impact on Midland and where the company is going. So let me start by asking, in regards to the anniversary, I understand Dow has several initiatives it's promoting related to the theme, Imagine Better. Can you talk about what those are and update us on Dow's plan to become carbon neutral and its Plastics Singularity initiative?
Yeah, I think we want to do several things with our 125th anniversary, and the theme of Imagine Better, I think, really describes not only the history, but the future, where we're going. We want to celebrate the history. I think it's important for this community. It's important for a lot of retirees and employees who've put a lot into Dow over that time frame. Celebrate where we are today, coming off a record year last year and a really strong spin out of the Dow-DuPont merger, which was a big change for us. And then focus on the future, which we believe means being net zero, being carbon neutral, and also addressing circularity issues in plastics, but in literally every product line that we're in. The pressures there from consumers and from brand owners to be circular in all aspects of the business are increasing. So it's a good time to not only reflect on what we've done in the past, but also channel that into what we want to do in the future. And sustainability and circularity are key drivers of our strategy in every product line.
Jim, what do you feel are the three key reasons that Dow's been a successful company for 125 years, and how much has the Midland community played into that success?
Great science would be a fantastic starting point. You know, the research work that we do to develop new products and new processes for chemistry are fundamental. You go back to Herbert Dow in the very beginning, the process for making chlorine and bleach and bromine and iodine from the natural salt deposits, brine deposits under the state of Michigan was revolutionary at the time. We were also a big energy user at the time because that was electrochemistry, so a lot of electricity to make that happen. He was an early patent holder with George Westinghouse on cogeneration, which was the most affordable way to basically make steam and electricity for operations. So there was always a sustainability mindset and a low cost, a low energy mindset and a consideration about that. Great engineering would probably be the second thing that I would say. Mr. Dow was a hands-on engineer himself. He was very focused on how machinery operated, how the plants operated. He spent time in the operations, and he was obviously looking at better ways to do things all the time. And I think he would be pretty proud of the engineering and research teams that we have here today and what we're doing. Just to give you an idea of the importance of the research work, about every 5 years, we turn over a third of our product line. So you think about it, a third of our products are new every 5 years, meaning we bring something to market that displaces something that we sold 5 years ago. And we have a pretty simple rule of thumb in research, which is not only needs to be a better performing product, it needs to be more sustainable than the product it replaced. And very proud of the work the team's been able to do. And then the last thing I think you'd be proud of is just how important we are to people and communities. You know, Midland was built by, I wouldn't say built by, I mean, Midland was here as a lumber town at a time where the lumber industry was slowing down and the future was not quite certain around Midland. And he brought a different industry into Midland and had a big impact on this community. And you look around and you say, wonder what Midland would look like without the impact of not just Dow, But many families that worked for Dow that became wealthy and put money back to work here through foundations and through different organizations that still continue to drive, a lot of the quality of life that is here today. And that was important when we went to Freeport, Texas, to Lake Jackson. It was important when we went to Louisiana, when we went to the Netherlands, when we went to Stade, Germany, when we went to Brazil and to Argentina. So I think he would look around and be proud that in every one of those communities, in every one of those plant sites where you go see Dow, you walk into that operation, you feel Dow. It doesn't matter that it's in a different country. You just see a way of operating and a way of people dealing with each other and dealing with their communities that is second to none. And that's not just coming from me, that comes from a lot of people outside, government leaders, third-party organizations that we work with. They're proud to have Dow in the community because Dow's a big part of the community and gives back.
Those are great points that you made, and it just shows what the company's been able to do. But there's been times in Dow's history where it's been viewed very negatively by the public. I'm talking about producing products that were used in Vietnam, dioxin in the Tittabawassee River, millions of dollars in EPA fines. How do you reconcile that past as you move into the future?
Well, I think with any company and with any industry, as you move through time, you find out things about different products or different chemistries that are used, and we've seen it in a lot of industries over time. And I think that Dow stepped up to address many of those concerns and tried to do it in a way that was positive and constructive. I can't speak to the fines at the time and what that situation was, but I think if you look at how we addressed the situation, we tried to be constructive, tried to work with the government, tried to work with the community to work through those. And out of every one of those incidents, we learned something, and we build that into how we move forward and do things in a better way. And so I think if you look at the last 30 years of progress that we've made here, things have been a lot different for Dow, and I think we're on a much more positive foot going forward, and we want to try to sustain that. It doesn't mean that something might not happen in the future that turns out to be negative, but we're going to do our best to try to avoid that.
What is Dow doing today to help protect the communities that it operates in?
Working on a lot of different fronts. I talked about product chemistry before. So whenever we look at a new class of chemistry, one of the first screens we do with that chemistry is around known carcinogens. And so we look at combinations of chemistry and we rule out certain combinations because we're worried that they would be something that would be a problem in the future. So it becomes a design parameter. You design your experiments to say, I'm going to make a new product to address a certain need, but I'm going to do it within certain chemistries that would be acceptable, and I'm going to avoid other chemistries. That's a big one. How we operate our assets. We take a look at holistically how we operate the sites. So Midland here, you talked about dioxin. Midland here for a number of years has been a facility where we really tightly control discharge water back to the river. And we have to look at very, very low threshold levels of waste. We've got a tremendous environmental operations practice here that does that for us. Well, we do that at all of our sites around the world. We look at not only things like our air emissions, so any greenhouse gas emissions. We look at our water emissions. We're looking more and more these days at the impact to our communities on fresh water. So how much fresh water do we take in? How much of it might go through the facility one time as cooling water, for example, and go back into a body of water? How can we eliminate that? How can we make that maybe completely, fully contained within a site? So Terneuzen in the Netherlands, for example, today, we do a project with Industry Park and the municipality there, where we use more recycled water within our facility, which takes the load off the fresh water for them. the municipality uses more fresh water, and then we both take more recycled water from the municipality, not only just for Dow, but for other industry partners into their operations as well. And around the world, the idea is to go through our locations, because water scarcity is going to become as big an issue as carbon neutrality, and make sure that we have a way to address water scarcity. We've always tried to manage our own water needs at the sites. We do that through a reservoir system in Texas. We do that different ways at different sites, but elevating that. And then I'd say thirdly is transparency and data sharing with the public. So if you look at our 2021 ESG report called Intersections, you'll see a pretty comprehensive reporting of our impact on the environment. That's only going to become more comprehensive and more transparent as we move forward. As we get more demands put on us, we're going to have to disclose more information. As we get better monitoring and as we develop more targets on things like the water circularity, you'll see us divulge more of that in every annual report. So if you look at this year's report, which will come out, usually comes out sometime in June, you'll compare it to last year's report and you'll see another level of detail come out of that. And that's just, I think that's a continuation of the mindset that Mr. Dow had. If you can't do something better, why do it? So we try to bring that to life through that reporting and that engagement with the communities.
Jim, you've touched on this with the previous question, but just coming back to Herbert Henry Dow, understand that you didn't know him personally, but we're just still curious. So what do you think Herbert Henry Dow would think about the company that he founded, if we could ask him today?
He might be surprised that it's still here after 125 years. I mean, but I don't think he would be surprised that its business had changed, that the lines of business had changed. If you remember, he got into the business with chlorine, bromine, and iodine in a different time frame. And very early on, he got out of the business of making bleach because he determined it wasn't a good return on capital versus some of the other things that he could produce. And so if you look at the history of the company through, whether it was through commodities or specialties like ag or other products, I think he would look at it and say, that's what I would expect. You have to keep changing the portfolio to meet the times, and you have to stay ahead of what the marketplace wants. And I think he'd be happy about that. He'd be happy that it isn't just a chlorine and inorganic chemistry company, that it's really branched out to be many things.
And including the endeavors into things like the Dow Tennis Classic, the balloons, the Dow GLBI.
Well, don't forget that in the early days, before there was a Midland Center for the Arts, there was a Dow Symphony and there was a Dow Chorus. Before there were the Dow GLBI and the Tennis Classic, there were the Dow Chargers softball team. There was a company basketball team that predated the existence of the ABA. So yeah, I don't think he would be surprised about any of that. I think he'd be happy that we're using those platforms to get the company name out and to attract attention. He'd be happy about the contributions back to the community. And I think, the partners that we have with the WTA and with the LPGA are first-class ambassadors, and so I think he'd be proud of that.
Jim, I think most people are horrified by the images that they see coming out of the Ukraine today. Dow had employees working both in Ukraine and in Russia. How can Dow go back to Russia and resume operations if the current regime remains in power?
It's a very difficult situation right now. Dow has not a big presence in either one of them. I think two joint ventures, largely Russia and the Ukraine, less than 100 employees, so small. And we had moved away from any purchase of feedstocks. We had done some in history. We'd done some spot purchases for feedstocks into Europe. We quit all that before Russia ever entered because we you could see what was coming. This was not going to be a popular situation. The pressure is going to be there. You talk about the Ukraine. Obviously, Ukraine is going to have to rebuild. So going back into Ukraine is a much easier answer than going back into Russia. Russia is going to be a tough situation. And I don't know how yet, honestly, the world is going to sort through that. Right now, the world's, at least the United States, is pretty adamant that Russia's off limits. And now the world is concerned about what's the Russia-China relationship and what kind of pressure does that put on us for the rest of the world. Some of this was coming already, talk of decoupling around the world, moving from a very open global trade kind of an environment that we've been in, you could argue, for the last 60 years, and was a big part of Dow's growth. But now it's turning more towards regional strategies. What do you have to do in each region? What do you do for that market? Not so much driven by climate, a little bit maybe trying to get supply chains closer to home, less molecular tourism, less shipping of product around the world. But there are limits to that. Low cost has also got to play into this. And as you know, we're in an inflationary environment right now. And that's been exacerbated by the whole Russia-Ukraine situation, whether you're talking about food or energy or raw materials or precious metals. That's been exacerbated tremendously by this situation. And in an inflationary environment, you hit a limit on how much people can afford to pay. And at that point, people begin to realize we can't do this at any cost. So where's the balance between low cost and what we need for people to continue to develop the quality of life that they want, people to continue to move up into middle class, developing countries to be able to have the energy, low-cost energy they need to do simple things like electrify their country so that people can move up, so they can do things like heat their homes or pump water instead of carry it and extend the quality of their life. And I think that's the biggest challenge that we're going to have to deal with. How long can this go on? Is this another Cold War? How long does that last? Or will something change in Russia that changes the attitude of the United States and the NATO allies around what they want to see as the final resolution of this? And I wish I knew the answer to that, but I don't.
Jim, how is Dow working to meet its diversity, equity, and inclusion goals? And how important is it is the company's DEI for you, both as a chairman and CEO of Dow and as a member of the LGBTQ community?
Well, DEI, the most important part of diversity, equity, and inclusion for us is attracting talent to come and work at the company. For two reasons. One, I think our customers want to see diversity in our ranks that matches diversity in their ranks. And more than 70% of our product goes to consumer brands, and they look at their customers as the general population. And so they want to see a reflection that we mirror that. Secondly, it brings in diverse perspectives. So we usually in diversity, people are talking about ethnicity, gender, race, different elements. But it's just diversity of perspectives and mindsets that have to come into an organization. So if you want to be an innovative organization and everybody looks the same and is from the same background and went to the same schools, you're missing out on a lot of different perspectives. And you may not be opening the aperture wide enough to bring in the kind of talent that you need. And so talent is the first key and then the foremost thing for diversity. And I think we're benefiting right now from having that. And diversity attracts more diversity. If you look at young people today coming out of college or coming out of high school, deciding where they want to go work, a lot of times they're taking into account different things than I might have when I came to work. They look at, would my friends be accepted there? Would they be able to work there? Whereas in my day, the first thing people tended to look at was the type of job and the amount of money I could make. So priorities have changed a bit. Second thing I'd say on diversity is when you think about opening the aperture to underrepresented groups, one of the things we're doing is something that Dow has done for 125 years, is give people an opportunity not just to have a job, but to have a career. And many, many families in Dow, and if you can go back generations, we have in Midland or in Texas, we have families that are 4 and 5 generations deep in Dow. And what they would tell you, many of them, was back in the early generations, that was their first opportunity to have a job and a career and to make a living and to be able to send their children off to school and to make sure that that living not only supported them, but supported other generations. And I think that's one of the things we're trying to do with diversity and underrepresented groups, is give them a leg up to have that same opportunity that many of us had. There are a lot of people in Dow who were the first in their family to go to college and get a degree and come get a job and then work for 35 or 40 years and be very well off and be able to put their children through school. And maybe they went to work for Dow or maybe they didn't, but they had that option. And I think that's one of the biggest things we're trying to do. The second thing is discrimination really doesn't have any place in the workplace, and we're trying to tackle that head on. The best way to tackle that, I think, is from a positive standpoint, is to make an environment that's very inclusive. So everybody feels comfortable coming to work here. They should come to work feeling safe. They should come to work not having to hide who they are. They should come to work and bring their whole self every day. If you have to come to work and hide who you are, it's hard to bring 100% of yourself to work every day. And we don't want that. That isn't the kind of environment that we want to create. This was a family company as it started out. One of the reasons we look after the community the way we do is we still have a big sense of family. And that family definition is changing. It's becoming broader, more diverse, and more inclusive. And that's the way that I look at it anyway.
What are the most significant ways that COVID-19 has changed the way that Dow operates? And specifically, I'd like you to talk a little bit about what you learned about the company's culture as you worked together through the pandemic.
You know, it was an interesting time. We not only handled the pandemic, we handled the flood in Midland, we handled a couple of hurricanes down on the Gulf Coast, we handled a lot of situations. First thing I would say, this company was very early in investments in digital technology. We literally went from being in the office to half the company working from home overnight and didn't miss a beat. In fact, it was the month of March that everybody went home. And we were worried about closing the books in the first quarter. And we did it remotely, digitally, and did it on time and no errors and no issues. And I think the light bulb went off in everybody's head and said, wow, this is pretty powerful. You know, one, we got a strong team, but two, we have the backbone that we need to collaborate with each other. You're sitting here in the Dow studio. In the first year of COVID, we went from having customers coming into Midland like every week. They would come here to the research center. We would do top-to-top meetings. We'd take them through the labs, show them what we're doing. We would talk about what they want to do with their product lines. We'd start projects. We couldn't do any of that. We couldn't do it at any of our research sites around the world. This studio went into high gear, and we did 188 customer webinars and customer top-to-top meetings from March till the end of that first year. So we didn't miss a beat with customers. We didn't miss a beat in the labs launching new products. Some of our pilot lines that we run in places like Texas or here in Midland, usually we would have customers come in and we would run maybe plastics for packaging or polyurethanes on our pilot lines to prove out a new product before they would run them on their commercial lines. Well, we couldn't do that, or we couldn't go to their sites to run it on the site for them. So the team just put cameras on everything. And we were running pilots with cameras on all the lines on webcasts with customers watching the trials, and they could read the data and see the data that was coming off the machines. And that would allow them to continue and go ahead and do the things they needed to do to improve their product lines. So pretty impressive. We engineered projects and executed capital projects on time and under budget. Last year, we were still under COVID for all of last year. 6 major turnarounds. A major turnaround for us cost about $100 million and takes about 100 days. All 6 of them on time and under budget. That's a pretty big feat when you think about the number of contractors and laborers that have to be on site, the amount of material you have to procure, the amount of engineering that has to be done to get ready for it. It takes 18 to 24 months to plan for one of those. And we were able to do all that. It says a lot about the capabilities of the people. It's also the mindset of Dow people. Tough things happen, and you do what you have to do. The flood hit, and we were fortunate that the work we'd done on the previous 100-year flood was to the standard that allowed us not to have any issues out in Michigan Division. We take that same approach after hurricanes. A hurricane hits. We look at where we have issues with the infrastructure. We beef it up and get ready for the next challenge. That's just the Dow mindset. And so tough things happen. It isn't a matter of who they happen to or what did you do wrong that caused them to happen to you. It's what you do with it. And that's the way the team responded. To the point that we delivered our best year ever in any shape of the company in 2021. So I couldn't be prouder of the team. We kept our diversity intact through all of it. We continued to develop new products. We set our strategy for decarbonization. We set our strategy for circularity, all during that time frame. To me, I think we took advantage of a great situation. And on the people side, we got closer to our people, and we understand how important flexibility is for them. Not just the ability to have some flex to work from home, but flexibility if you're raising a family, flexibility if you're taking care of elder parents who might need your help, or if you're a caregiver of any sort. That kind of flexibility, I think, is more valued by people than I would have believed going into COVID.
So pandemic and then natural disasters on top of that.
Right.
And you've got people working to protect the company's infrastructure, but then they've got homes they have to deal with, flooded homes, destroyed homes. How as a company do you negotiate all that at the same time?
Well, you just do what you have to do. The most important thing is you kind of drop everything and you say, if people don't have a place to live, they're not going to make it. So immediately, we kind of went into volunteer mode, and people went out and helped each other take drywall out, clean out basements, do the kinds of things they need to make their home habitable. We swung into gear. We got hotel rooms for people that were completely displaced all around the region so that they had some place to stay and still they could get a better living situation. Of course, some employees lived in Sanford and they lost everything. And so they needed, more of a midterm, long-term situation. If you look at Texas and the hurricanes, and this goes back, many years now, at least 30 plus years. One of the original hurricanes I remember in Louisiana, it was a purchasing group here in Midland that saw what was coming. And usually with a hurricane, you have some warning what's coming. And they organized to get a group of trailers set up. And they ordered them and got them mobilized outside the hurricane region. And as soon as the hurricane was through, the trailers moved in and we set up a mobile home park for people who had lost their homes. You can't underestimate the impact that has on people. We did the same thing during both hurricanes down in Texas and Louisiana, Hurricane Harvey. It's kind of become the standard on how we operate. It not only helps people take a burden off, but it also shows them that we care. our HR team immediately goes into action and we offer interest-free loans so that people have some money. You know, one of the first things they need is some cash to be able to pay somebody to fix their roof or take the drywall out of their house. That little bit of cash that they can get interest-free is often what gets them kick-started to kind of get ahead of that curve. And then I can't say enough about what our partners around the world did. We made a lot of phone calls to companies that we work with to get aid brought in here, turned the hangar out at the airport into a receiving facility, and we were getting tools and supplies and stuff to distribute out, which we did through the United Way with their help. So it's a pretty well-oiled machine now when something like that happens.
Yeah, with this being the 125th anniversary, Jim, and especially with the change of pace throughout the world accelerating, where do you see, where would you like to see the company be at 150 in 2047?
Well, last October we laid out a path to 2050, so that's going to be pretty close to that anniversary. And part of that path was to decarbonize the company, to become net zero by 2050. And by net zero, what I'm talking about is take our absolute scope 1 and 2 emissions to zero, and then get our scope 3 emissions down as well. And I would say we made fantastic progress. We've outlined projects between now and 2050 that will take our scope 1 and 2 emissions to zero. We earmarked $1 billion a year of capital to be able to do that. And so methodically, religiously spending that capital on those projects will get us to that level. We also want to work with our suppliers. About 800 suppliers will help us get the scope 3 emissions down to zero. And last year we did a deep dive with 150 of them. 80% of them already have net zero targets, which is I think is a great thing. Now we've got to work our way through the next tranche of, next 500 or so of them, which we'll do this year and next year. And I think by then we'll have a really good target for 2030 and 2050. Plastic circularity is another area. We have a target to have everything we make for packaging be recyclable by 2035. We're already above 80% of that today. And so no doubt that we'll be able to get there. And then the other commitment was to take 1 million tons a year of waste out of the environment by creating recycle opportunities. Today, most plastics are mechanically recycled, which means they're relatively clean when they're collected, then they're melted down, and then they're made back into plastic products. But there's a limit to how much of that you can do with recycled material without having to blend it with virgin materials. So we want to look at advanced recycling, which would take those plastics. It might take some plastics that are not as clean, and through pyrolysis or syngas, convert them back into molecular ethylene or feedstock that we can use in an ethylene cracker, and to make virgin materials out of recycled plastics. And so we think for the combination of those two, if we were to take 1 million metric tons a year, and we're about 9% of that whole polyethylene market, if everybody followed suit, we'd be able to address the plastics waste issue in a big way. So we're targeting our investments in plastic circularity, not only on the design end, but on the recycle end. And we're doing some interesting things. Sometimes recycled plastics will go back into packaging. Like if you would go to the store and buy a case of bottled water, you might see it's all wrapped in shrink wrap. Today we have a product that contains 70% post-consumer recycle that's in that shrink wrap that's on the outer wrap. That's a pretty substantial amount and still has the strength and the quality that you need for that application. We're doing interesting things like with Meijer here in Michigan, where we take recycled, shopping bags, which are recyclable, get people to bring them back to the Meijer stores, and then when Meijer does a project like to repave the parking lot, they recycle those plastic bags into the paving solutions. You've run articles about roads that we've done here in Midland. there's not only a better use for that material, but it makes the roads more resilient. They handle the weather, the winter freezing and thawing and those stresses, and they last longer. So we're taking that around the world to different locations. We've got a project back in my home state in Missouri. We've got projects in Texas. We've got projects all over the United States, all over the world for those kind of areas. It's going into building materials like building blocks. Like think about a concrete block, but instead of a concrete block, think about an aggregate block that has some recycled plastics in it that's lighter and stronger than a concrete block. Or think about a completely plastic block. Both of those are possible today. And so I think that's a big area. And it doesn't stop with plastics, like for packaging materials. Polyurethanes, we have one of the largest recycle projects in France, in the world. Taking mattresses and pillows that might go to landfill, recycling them back into mattresses and pillows, or sponges that you might use at home, or insulation materials that you might use in your house. And so we're continuing to work through the product line to see how much more of that we can do. So I think we'll be there in 25 years. And the other thing I think is we'll be more than double what we are today. Part of the decarbonize and growth strategy was not just to decarbonize the footprint, but it was also to double the output of the company, which I think will be possible maybe even faster than 25 years. And the product line will change because times will change and the consumers will demand it. We'll have a much bigger business in mobility. Electric vehicles are a great opportunity for us. Today, about 30% of the content of an internal combustion engine vehicle contains our materials. If you get into electric vehicles, with so much more electronics on them, the amount of silicone materials that we use there are 2 to 3 times as much as an internal combustion engine vehicle. One of the areas that we play a big part in is noise, vibration, and harshness. So how do you make the ride of the cabin quieter? Well, that's a big thing in an internal combustion engine vehicle because you've got engine noise and road noise, but you got no engine noise in an electric vehicle. So now you've just got the road noise. So that puts more pressure on us to help the EV manufacturers to make that ride inside quiet because they've got to take that hum of the tires out of it. So interesting things are happening with the product mix. And then consumer brands, more bio-based materials. We already have it in cosmetics today. I think we're going to see it more in household consumer goods that you buy at the store. You're going to see it more, I think, even in plastics. We're going to see the demand for more bio-based materials. And having to balance that out with the environmental impact, obviously, that can create with some of the volumes that we produce is going to be big. We'll be a licensor of a lot of new process technology that will enable others in the industry to get to net zero. We've got 2 technologies that are being piloted right now that we think will be leading technologies for making ethylene and propylene. We've got a nice project with Shell on electric cracking. So how can we convert an ethylene furnace to an electric coil and maybe power that with wind or solar or nuclear or perhaps electricity made from green or blue hydrogen. But first we got to get through proving out that it can be done. And so I think both on the product and the process side will be a much better company.
So tackling plastic waste, electric vehicles, and even fixing potholes. That's an ambitious plan for the next 25 years, and that's probably a good place for us to wrap up. So I just want to thank you again, Jim, for your time today, and from the Midland Daily News to all of Dow employees, we'd like to say happy 125th anniversary.
Thank you very much. Thanks for both of you for being here.
Thank you.